All right, my friend, we're going to be making the fire that I showed in the Discord chat. I have a brand new third-person, what is it? Third-person blueprint level just booted up. There's nothing in here except for the starter content and this texture that my wife made me in like 10 minutes or so. And I'll go ahead and give you this texture as well and show you how to set it up, and so it'll look the same as what I showed in that GIF anyway. So the first thing you're going to want to do is enable Niagara. It's not enabled off as a default. So you're just going to come up here to Window and Edit. There we go. Edit plugins. And you're going to type in Niagara, and you're going to make sure that this is enabled. When you check it, it's going to ask you to restart. You're going to restart your editor, and then you should be good to go. All right, let's get started. First thing we're going to want to do is just create a new folder. We're going to call it Particle Systems. And then inside of here, we're going to make another folder just called Fire, just to keep things all nice and organized. And I'm going to go ahead and drag in my texture as well, so I can keep that organized. And then you're just going to right click in this space, go to FX, Niagara Emitter. And you should get this template off the bat. If you don't have the template, it means you have an older version of the Unreal editor. And if you have an older version, highly recommend that you update. If you can't update it, I think it's going to start off as this fountain. You can more or less follow along, although some things are going to be different. So you may have to do some fiddling around, and I'm going to help you out with that. But if you have this template, we're going to select Upward Mesh Burst. Click OK, and we're going to name this Particle Emitter Niagara _ Fire. And we're going to open it up. Ooh, mine opened up very small. All right. So the first thing that I like to do is do a little bit of housekeeping. I really don't like this background. I find it makes it very difficult to see the particles in the particle system, especially when you have a lot of stuff moving around. So you're going to go over here to Preview Scene Settings. If you don't see this tab, you want to come up to Window and make sure that this Preview Scene Settings is enabled. So click Preview Scene Settings. And then we're going to uncheck Show Environment. And you're going to get this nice black in there in the background. Moving over to the viewport, the control screen is a little weird. It's in this orbit mode where you can sort of pivot on the Z-axis. And it's very different from any of the other control schemes inside of Unreal. To disable it, if it makes you uncomfortable, it makes me uncomfortable. We're going to just uncheck this orbit mode. So you're going to click it. And then now you can hold down your right click and use WASD and kind of just move around just like you would inside the editor. All right, housekeeping stuff out of the way. We're going to go over to our selected emitters tab. And there's going to be a bunch of stuff unfolded here. And to make things a little neater, a little more compact, you're going to right click up here in this gray area and select Collapse to Headers. That's just going to collapse everything for you. I do this quite a bit. I like to keep things nice and neat. The first thing that we're going to go over is just the different parts of an emitter. And we're going to go over this orange area, this green area, and then down here on this renderer, and then we'll do a little bit over here on the parameters. The emitter itself is broken up into spawn and update, and the same thing for the particles, spawn and update. And they do what you would more or less expect. Spawn is on spawn, meaning it happens once. Update happens on every frame. The orange area is specific to the emitter itself, so like everything involving the emitter. So for example, we have the spawn burst instantaneous. That's going to affect the entire emitter. The particles variables and all the particle modules are going to affect the individual particles themselves. So the first thing we're going to want to do is come up here to the life cycle, the emitter life cycle. We're going to be changing this max loop count and this next loop duration. Max loop count just specifies how many times is the system going to loop until it's done. Right now it's set to 1, so if we were to put it into the world, it's going to go off once, and then it's not going to go off anymore. We want this to be a continuous system, so we're just going to set this to 0. And for the duration, we're going to set it to 3. That's just going to be the duration of our system. You can see down here on your timeline, the emitter now has a total time of 3 seconds as noted by this green area here. All right, let's collapse that. Spawn burst instantaneous is something that we're going to be using, but we also want a constant stream of particles. So in combination with the spawn burst instantaneous, we're just going to need a spawn rate, and we're going to need to add the spawn rate module to the emitter update section. So how we do that is we make sure that we are clicking on the plus sign for emitter update. So just kind of line yourself up there on emitter update. You don't want to be up here like on emitter spawn or something like that. You can get a little confused. Click on the plus and just type in spawn, and we're going to choose spawn rate. And we can already set a value here, so we can say something like 60. You can see now we're going to get a continuous stream of 60 particles, and then we're also going to get a burst as well, a burst of particles. The system itself, fire in general, does not do very well, in my opinion, when we're just dealing with static values. So we're going to be doing a lot of ranges, uniform range floats, uniform range integers, and that sort of thing. And how we change this from just a static value of like 100 to a dynamic range that the system's going to pick for us is we're just going to select this little arrow here. And then you're going to type in range. And this is going to change the variable to whatever it is that you specify. You can choose all kinds of stuff in here. You can type in things like curve if it has curve stuff available to it. You can see there's like tons and tons of stuff in here. We're going to be doing a lot with uniform ranges, so we're going to get real used to working with that. We're going to set this spawn count to 30 to 50. I believe so. 5 to 10. No, that's way too much. 5 to 10. There we go. How to read my notes. The spawn rate, we're going to change to 30 to 50. So we're going to click on this little down arrow again. We're going to change this from a static value to a uniform ranged float. And we're going to change it from 30 to 50. So now we're going to get a stream of particles between 30 and 50 with a burst of 5 to 10. Seems pretty good. Kind of going over my notes here a little bit. Spawn time. I believe we're okay there. Yes, I believe we're okay. All right, so we're going to collapse all the headers now, and we're going to move down to a particle spawn. And we're going to be messing with the particle scale. Anytime that you want to add any kind of variable to your system, you're going to probably end up putting it in the set variables module. Keeps things very nice and neat. If you ever want to know what variables you have available to you, it's in this parameter section here, and you can unfurl all of these, and you can see all of the stuff that's available to you just as the base particle system, and then you can just add variables however you see fit. This is how you would attach to like skeletal meshes or any other kind of if you want to grab like material instances or something like that. You would want to create a variable of that type, and then you could start messing with it. And then you would set it like, in your set variables here. So your particle scale, we're also going to change this to a range. So I'm just going to type in uniform range vector, or just range up here. And we're going to set this to 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. And 0.3, 0.3, 0.3. So our arrows got very much smaller. And I think it would help a lot to go ahead and set the texture or the mesh that we're going to be using so we can get a better visual of what's going on. So let's come down to the render. And the particle mesh you can see here is this arrow. We don't want the arrow. We want a sphere. Let's see here, sphere. And we want a particular sphere. Let's see here, which one is it? I believe it's this one. There's a couple different spheres. There's just different sizes. And I think it's this one that I was using originally. It doesn't matter too much. We can always just change it later. And the texture that we're going to use is the M Flare texture at the start. And this is just going to give us a baseline to work with until we apply our actual texture. Just to make sure that we're all on the same page and whatnot. So that should do it. There we go. All right. So not quite looking like fire, but better than arrows, I would say. Next up, we're going to be messing with this add velocity in cone. We don't want to be doing anything in a cone. If anything, we want to center this over a static area mostly. So we're going to just trash the add velocity in cone. And to do that, you just go to the module that you want to delete, and you just click on the trash can. If you don't feel comfortable deleting it, you could just uncheck it, and it will remove it, but you can always just re-enable it afterwards so you can kind of get an idea of like what that thing is actually doing. So we're going to trash it. And we're going to add a module to particle spawn. So make sure you're lined up there on particle spawn. And we're just going to add a velocity. There we go. And we're also going to be doing this as a range. So we want a little bit of... we do want a little bit just variance going on with the system. So we're going to set the Z, because we want it to go upward, from 50 to 100. And we're going to set this these X's and Y's to 0, because we want the fire to be in a static location pretty much, and then we want the velocity to kind of trail it upwards. You can see we're already kind of getting that effect here, where it's pushing all these particles up. That's looking pretty good. We're also going to set an initial rotation on all of the particles that spawn. So to do that, we just click again to add a new module. And I believe it's initial mesh rotation that we're looking for. And we're going to get the pitch, roll, and yaw. And we're going to also change these to uniform ranged float. The roll is also a uniform range float. And the yaw is also a uniform range float. There we go. And we're going to pick a range of degrees for it to pick from. And we're just going to go from negative 360 to 360. Negative 360 to 360. So this is the initial rotation of the particles. So we're going to get a lot of variance going on this rotation. And you can see now we're starting to get that sort of wavy, more chaotic-y kind of style already. Looking pretty good. Let's see. What's up next? Let's see. Oh, we need to add a location for these to spawn in, so we can have a little more control of where it is that they spawn. There's a couple of different ways to do spawning. We're going to choose a box location. So we're going to add a module to particle spawn. Click on box location. And you can see that because this box is set to 100, 100, 100, so it's a fairly large box, this is the area that the particles can spawn in. So they're going to kind of spawn all over the place. We want to control that a little bit more. We're going to bring that down to a 5. You can see now it's in a nice concentrated area. So if you wanted to maybe increase the amount of particles but spread them out over a bigger area, you could totally do that by just changing up this box size and then changing the amount of particles that you spawn up here and spawn rate. I think it would be nice if we added some color to this so we can really see some fire. Because right now it's a little hard to visualize, I think. It's this really weird color. So we're going to uncheck, we're going to uncollapse. What is it? What is that called? I don't know what that's called. Uncollapse it? Whatever. The default for the mesh template that we used is make linear color from vector and float. We don't want this. We want to change this variable type to curve. Color from curve here. You're going to see now we're going to be able to choose colors based on the lifetime of the particle. The first value that we want to do here is, we're going to you can either click in here, and you might get an opacity one down in here as well. That may mess you up a little bit. You can also just right click and add a key to all curves to make sure that you're hitting all of the RGB values as well. Another technique, I'm just clicking on these and hitting delete. If you want to visualize the curve a little bit more, you can click on this little show this curve in the curves tab, and it will tab over your timeline. So here's your timeline, and you get your curves here. And then you can scroll and see, for example, the opacity is starting at a value of 1, and then it's slowly going down to a value of 0. And then we can change this, and that sort of stuff. There we go. I'm going to change that back to a value of a 0 and that to a 1. So if you prefer to work inside of the graph itself, this is an option too. But we're going to mostly just be dealing with this and then just kind of verifying spot checking inside the graph. So I'm just going to click in here up top. And that's going to add a key to all the curves, hopefully. I've had it so sometimes it doesn't and sometimes it does. It's a little weird. And then we're just going to right-click the node and select the time to be 0. And the color, we want it to be this sort of off-white color at the start, so we get like that sort of smoldering core. And that's going to be 0.95 on the G and 0.54 on the blue. So we're going to get that sort of off-white color going on. And then we're just going to do it again here. We're just going to click in here. Right-click, and the time step for the next one is going to be 0.15, so very shortly after the particle spawn. We're going to then change it to that nice yellow color. So we're going to keep this at a 1.67 on the green and 0 on the blue. And then we're going to click it one last time, and this is going to be our red color. So we're going to click and then right-click the node, and we're going to change the time to 0.4. In the color, we're just going to leave the red as a 1 and change the green to a 0.25. Very slight on the green. And you can see that now that we have our color set, it's still transitioning off into white at the very end here. So we're just going to click that node and hit delete. You can see here, now we're starting to get a bit of fire going on. Although it's a bit fast, we might have to change this rotation rate a little bit. It's a little chaotic, but it's looking very much like fire now, and this is looking much better. So as the particles are alive, we also want to be rotating them again because this is looking still a little boring, in my opinion. So inside of particle update, we're going to be messing with this with the rotation. So we'll just add a new module called rotation, mesh rotation rate. And we're going to get the same values as we did before, the yaw, pitch, and roll. And then this is the rotation rate here. So we're going to change all of these from their static values into a uniform ranged float. Click, uniform ranged float. We're going to get very, very good at doing uniform ranged floats at the end of this. And instead of doing native 360 to 360, when I was messing around with the values, I really liked 0 to 180, but you're more than welcome to just start messing around with these. Doing negative values in here can cause it to sort of cancel out the rotation, and you won't really see all that much rotation as a result of it. This rotation rate as well, you can lower it, and that'll kind of calm the system down a little bit, although I think our initial rotation is a bit much. Maybe it's the scale. Maybe it's the sphere that we're using. This is looking very fast. Let me change the sphere. So I think I did choose the right sphere. Or is it this sphere? That's the wrong sphere. I think this will just have to work. This will work. This will work. Anyway, this rotation rate in here will slow down the system quite a bit. And if we increase it, we're going to introduce a lot more noise in the system. So if you do want to slow it down, this is a way for you to do that. Let's see here. Let's see. We also need to be changing up this mesh size scale. Right now they have a pretty uniform size. I mean, they're starting off small, at least according to this graph here. They're starting off at a value of 0, obviously, and then they're just sort of ramping up. and then they're just very slowly getting to 1.8 times. We want the fire to have a small start, then we're going to make it like explode out, and then it's going to shrink down to kind of give us that the fire at the top disappearing into the background. So in order to do that, we need to do the same thing as we did up here on the colors. We're just going to be adding keys, or in this case, we're just going to modify these 3 existing keys. So if you just click on the key itself, you'll get the time and the value. And the first time step will be at 0, so on particle spawn. We're going to set the value to 0.5. That's 50% of the particle's size. And then on the next time step, we'll be at 0.3. And we're going to set the value to 1, so they'll be at their full size. And then we'll select this third guy over here. And at time 0.69, we're going to set it to 1.4. And then from there, I want to add another curve, another point here. I just want to drop it down. There we go. I don't have this one quite in my notes, so I'm just kind of messing around a little bit here. So we're going to set this to maybe 0.89 and a value of 0. We're just going to kind of see how that looks. I think in the original fire that I showed in the GIF all the way over on the left, it doesn't have this in particular, but I think this looks really, really nice. So we're just going to leave it here. So again, the last point has a time of 0.89 and a value of 0. So we're just going to drop it off pretty fast, and then we can mess with that value a little bit later if we're feeling like it needs some tweaking. I still feel like the system is very, very chaotic, but I guess we'll just kind of keep it going and see what all we can do. And this is more or less it's pretty much finished, actually, aside from the material that we need to slap on it. Which we will do here. We'll make a system out of this first, and then we'll slap the material on it. So we can kind of get these side by side. So we're going to come up here and go compile, apply, and save. So make sure that we're saving. You should save pretty often in Niagara. It does crash pretty frequently. So be very mindful. So now if we wanted to see this system inside, or see this emitter inside of the game engine, if you were used to Cascade, you would just sort of drag and drop it into the world. You can't do that here because emitters are like a building block inside of Niagara, and it's systems that you place in the world. So lots of emitters make up a system, or one emitter can make up a system, and then you place the system. So if you already have an emitter and want to make a system out of it, you can just right-click it and go to Create Niagara System. And we're going to rename this to PSN, that's Particle System Niagara _fire. And we're going to open it up. And there's our emitter right there. And if you want to add multiple emitters to this, you would just come down here to this track, and you would just find the different emitters that you wanted to add into the system. All right, so we're just going to compile, save, close this out. Now we can place this in the world. There we go. Let's place it a place where we don't have to move very far in order to look at it. Yeah, there we go. That looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. Doesn't quite look like fire because it doesn't have the texture on it, so let's go ahead and add that texture. If you just drag and drop the image file, or really any image file will work, but in this one in particular, you just have to drag and drop it into the editor, and then you can right-click on it and go to Create Material. And we're going to call this m_flames. I'm going to open it up here. Now, there's a few things that we want to change on this. The first thing we're going to want to do is under the blend mode, we want to set this to additive. What this is going to do is any blacks that are in the image are going to add 1 to all the colors, and it's going to make them all black, which is going to make them transparent. And the shading model, we're going to change it from default lit to unlit. And we are also going to get a particle a color node as well. So you're just going to right click up here in the space. And we're going to type in particle color, or just particle. And we want to multiply the particle color with the texture and then shove it into the emissive color, and we should be good to go at that point. So we should be able to just drag this off, hold M, M click. There we go. For a multiply node, you don't have to hold M. So it's just hold M, click, and you get a multiply node. If that's not working for you, you could just right click and type in multiply, and you should be good to go there. It's going to need two values, so we're going to multiply this one, the particle color. I'm going to grab this guy, and we're going to shove that into the emissive color. Just going to break that link there. And that should be it. Should be all that we need. You can see here we have a texture with some transparency to it. Looking pretty good. That's what we're looking for there. Got a little bit of jagged edges, but I think it'll be fine. Now what we could do is let's make a copy of this fire system. So I'm going to hit Control-C and Control-V. And we're going to call this PSN Fire with texture. So we can have both systems out so we can really just see the difference between the two. So now let's go down to the Niagara mesh properties. And where we originally set this M flare, we're just going to search for our M flames, but I see it right there. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab it. Wait for it to compile. There we go. Hey, looking pretty good. Looking pretty good. So let's compile, save. And then we can just drag this guy out into the world. You can see that we didn't modify this original emitter. We just made a copy of the system. So that's some of the really neat things about Niagara, in my opinion, is that it's so modular. All right, so let's take a look at both of these. So you can see that nothing has changed between these two. The only thing that changed on it was the texture, and we get this really, really cool effect. You can get any texture that you want with this method that I showed you for creating a very, very simple material. You're going to want a grayscale or black and white version of, you're going to want a grayscale of the picture, so that the whites in the picture are going to be the brightest points, and then the blacks in the picture are going to be the transparent points. And you can really see them if we come real close to this guy here. Looking pretty good. And that concludes it. You could just start modifying these values. So we'll come up here, we'll collapse all these headers. You can modify things like the spawn rate if you want to, if it's just got a little too much for you. We can set up this, we could set down the scale size if we really wanted to, or really make this drop off a bit harder. Might be a lot of fun there. You could just start messing around with stuff. You mess around with the velocity, you could really shoot stuff. You could really mess around with the color as well. If you're not familiar with doing like those super bright values in Unreal, you could just crank up the value beyond 1 to like a 3, and you get that crazy glowing effect. It's a little too much there. Even 10's a little too much. Yeah, you got a lot of stuff stacked on top of each other. So I encourage you to use this as a baseline to start messing with the values, and that way you could get something that, you know, is really aesthetically pleasing to you, and you could just really go to town on all this stuff. So I hope this was super helpful. Let me know if you have any questions at all, and I'll try to help you out as best as I can. All right. Thank you, and good luck.